I'll tell you a story. Remember, I mentioned a couple hours ago, I was talking to this trumpet player who was such a good player. I stayed ahead of him, auditions, all the way until the last possible audition of my senior year. I was section leader, I was principal for, the 2 years that we were together there. He was 2 years behind me. He was a sophomore and I was a senior. And I stayed ahead of him just through, I have no idea how, actually, because he was a great player. But I stayed ahead of him until the last possible audition for the last concert set of my senior year. And the day after the auditions were posted and I was second chair and he was first chair, we went in, I sat in the proper chair. We had switched places. And the first moment that it was the opportunity, I reached up and turned the page just to make sure that he knew. Yeah, and we were good friends anyway. He knew that I wasn't holding any. He probably felt a little bit awkward just because, he's a nice guy, so he would have felt a little bit, oh. But I made sure that I turned the pages. I got the music out. I was the assistant principal at that point and for the rest of my senior year. And it's an important thing to, I felt it was important to me to acknowledge that and to make sure that he knew that I was acknowledging. He was actually in a seat that he probably deserved a long time before that.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio-on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Jake Walker and Colin Peters for their contributions to the show, and especially to all of you who are listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now on to my next guest, Greg Bimm. Hi, Greg.
Hi.
Thanks for here. Oh, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate the chance to have a conversation with you.
I'm looking forward to it.
So, Greg, can you introduce yourself for the listeners?
Sure. I am the band director of bands at Marian Catholic High School in Chicago Heights, Illinois, and that is it's a private Catholic high school, co-ed, on the very south suburbs of Illinois. If you think about our location, we are only a few miles from Corn to the south, and we're about 5 miles from the Indiana border. So basically, if you walk straight south out of the loop in Chicago, if you walk far enough, you'll walk into Chicago Heights. So we're we just refer to it as South Side, and that's it's a Chicago catchphrase. Where you're from, South Side. Mm-hmm. And there's a certain something that goes with that. But anyway, Marian Catholic is a co-ed Catholic high school. And I've been here, I'm finishing my 44th year. It's been a great thing. I started, actually, I know you wanted me to talk a little bit about how this all started. So I'll just back up a little bit.
Sure.
My grandfather played the trumpet. He was a kind of a jack of all trades in a little town, Wynette, Illinois. Mm-hmm. And he was a fireman and a salesman. From what I understand, for a while, he sold Conn instruments. I actually have a 1910 Conn cornet that he had. But he was a trumpet player, not a professional at all. But from what everybody said, he was quite a good musician. My dad learned the trumpet really from him. And again, Dad was a TV repairman, not a real trained musician, but a small town band trumpet player who absolutely loved the trumpet. And so it was sort of a given that I was going to play the trumpet. I was never forced to play the trumpet. It was just sort of, just kind of the accepted fact. And so when it came time to start band in fifth grade, I, of course, chose the trumpet and became part of the next generation. My son also played the trumpet, so it's gone on. We'll see about my grandson. But a couple of things that affected me way back then. When I started playing the trumpet, my dad he wasn't a rule guy, but he had things that he believed in. And one was, you're going to do this, you're going to really do it. And so the agreement was, if I was going to take band, if I was going to start playing the trumpet, I had to practice an hour and a half a day.
Wow.
As a fifth grader. And so I have two stories. One is about my dad, but the first week I remember one of my inspirations was my first trumpet teacher. He was the band director at my little school in Peru, Illinois. His name was Larry Katz, and he was very inspirational to me. He just loved teaching kids from what I could. Well, at least my relationship with him was like that. But my first interaction with him actually was my first lesson. Well, the second lesson, my first lesson, he came in, he showed me how to make a sound on the horn, and he gave me one exercise to do. He just said, I want you to just play your horn and play whatever note comes out with no valves down, and then push down the first valve, and then push down the second valve, and then push down the third valve, and just go between those valves so your fingers are moving, and whatever notes come out are going to come out. It's going to be fine. And so that was my assignment for the first week, and I practiced that an hour and a half every day. Well, my dad actually kind of intervened and taught me a C scale and stuff, because I think my dad was, he saw the wax on, wax off part of it, but he was like, an hour and a half of this is going to, so practiced an hour and a half every day. I went in, we had a lesson sheet that we had to turn in. And on the lesson sheet, it had a little box for every day, and you had to write the amount of practice you had, and it'd be signed by parents. So my mom filled it out. She wrote 1.5, 1.5, 1.5, 1.5 every day. And so I took the lesson sheet in, and Mr. Katz looked at me and said, "Oh, Greg, practicing 1.5 minutes a day is just not, you're going to have to practice more than that." I said, "No, that's an hour and a half." And he got this big smile. It's like, I'm going to like you, and so we hit it off right away. The interesting thing about that hour and a half that we spent, my dad worked incredible hours as a TV repairman. It was back in the day where if your TV went out, the repair people would make house calls. So he'd just drive from place to place for a business, working for a business, that is. And his hours were crazy. On Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, he worked 9 to 9. On Wednesday, he worked 9 to 6. And on Saturday, he worked 9 to 6. Each day, though, he got a chance to come home for dinner at 4:30 for a half an hour. And so when he came home every day at 4:30, he'd sit down to have his dinner, and I'd get my trumpet out, and we'd practice for a half an hour. And then, he'd just guide me through stuff. And then he'd come home at 9 o'clock after working 12 hours. And we'd sit down from 9 o'clock until 10 o'clock and practice together every night. I was in fifth grade, staying up practicing till 10 o'clock so that I could practice with my dad. And, there were times that, as a little guy, you're not that all enthralled with it. But, I look back on it now and, as a little guy, I'm thinking I'm sacrificing, man, because I'm practicing so much. Now I'm thinking back, my dad worked 12 hours and then would come home and practice another hour with me after working 12 hours. And so the real sacrifice was what my dad made. But, and obviously it had an impression on me because, I grew quickly on the trumpet and loved it right away. I know that I knew before the end of fifth grade that I was going to be a band director. I didn't want to be a professional trumpet player. I just wanted to be a band guy. And, my first stuff was all about Sousa. My dad loved Sousa. And so that was my goal. And then I started to, as I got older, my horizons expanded a little bit, but I never swayed from wanting to be a band director from the time I was in fifth grade. And so, that was the beginning. I was lucky enough then to go to a high school, LaSalle Peru High School, in the 60s, which was a really, really fine school, a fine band school. We had two directors at the time. One is a man named Christopher Izo, who was iconic. Actually, Julie Giroux wrote a piece based on him. I can't remember the name of it. I know it starts with a B, but in the notes she writes about being in his honor band a couple of times and about his personality. But he was an incredible teacher and an incredible inspiration. He was. There were two directors there, and they were. They both had these differing personalities. Mr. Izo was all blood and passion, very Italian, and all of the Ravelli kind of stuff was coming from his direction. The other director is Melvin Pontius, who is still alive, and he lives up in Wisconsin. And he was very much more the cerebral kind of person. It's not that he didn't have passion, but he had a brilliance about the way that he studied things, and he would do arrangements for brass choir, and he got us involved in playing in churches and doing all kinds of stuff. And so, the first piece I played in high school in the once the concert band started was First Suite in E flat. We played the Chaconne when I was in Mr. Pontius's band before I got into they didn't allow freshmen in the top band until the second semester. So when I was in the quote second band, we were playing the Chaconne from First Suite in E flat. So talk about a great way to step into real band music. It's pretty crazy. So I was very lucky. The program there could play virtually anything. They had a deep sense of pride and dignity and a passion for success. Like it was generally felt across the band room, at least in the way that I perceived it, was we could pretty much accomplish anything. And we were very proud to do whatever it took to accomplish those things. It was a great way to start. And there's still some LaSalle Peru in me and in Marian Catholic. So I was very lucky to have those guys as inspirations. And the last, I'll do one more thing, and then I'll you can redirect me a little bit, but I remember that, thinking about things that inspired me at those times and had me get excited. When I was a freshman, the senior class was amazing. They were great players, especially from the eyes of a little freshman. But they were also dedicated. And whenever, as a little freshman, it's really easy to start to get a little bit out of line or, to not be as responsible. And boy, as soon as I would start to move a little bit away from the line, it wasn't like they were going to be mean, but they would just take me aside and go, "No, this is how we are here. You're not going to do this," So I was the beneficiary of a truly great and inspired school system growing up. And that really is what, I love band and I wanted to be a band director. And I just happened to be in a place that was an amazing place to grow up in bands. And so I got real lucky with that.
So where is that school?
LaSalle Peru is about 60 miles west of Joliet, maybe 90 miles from Chicago, straight on Interstate 80, straight across the state. It's not quite midway across the state, but it's 60 miles west of Joliet.
Sure. And for those who don't know, Joliet's what about 30 miles, 40 miles south of Chicago? How far is Joliet?
It's a little bit west and south, and maybe 20 or something like that.
Yeah.
So you really can drive. If you're driving down 55 from Chicago, you're never really leaving city. You're like Chicago, suburb, and then all of a sudden Joliet.
Not till past Joliet is when it feels like it opens up.
Yep. Once you get past Joliet, all of a sudden you can start to see corn.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, I live on the edge of the St. Louis suburb, so I'm on like the other end of the cornfield. So, you said a lot in there, so I'm going to kind of go through. I wrote some questions down while you were talking, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So, I'm struck by this 90 minutes a day. And I know you had your dad, and he must have been really kind of like, he must have had something to inspire you, because I know that if one of my fifth graders came to school and told me they practiced 90 minutes, I would look at them and and not believe them for a minute. So I'm curious how the 11-year-old Greg, do you remember how that happened?
It was Dad's decision, and he was not an iron-fisted guy at all. Like it wasn't like he was, but he was an iron-willed person. Like he wanted me to learn to play the trumpet, and so he had some rules that like one of his rules was if you play it wrong once, you play it right twice.
I like that.
Play it wrong twice, now you got 4 times. Now you can get yourself in a pretty big corner pretty fast with that. But that was the general way he would do stuff. And we talked about things with music all the time. And so it wasn't, I don't remember, I know that I was forced to practice sometimes because I wanted to go out and play with my friends or something like that. But I don't remember ever feeling like downtrodden or pounded on or overdone with it. We, along with practicing, we would always do our lesson stuff. And I learned some stuff about music in playing some of those early trumpet books, because some of the exercises were really non-musical. They'd write something in, and Dad and I would sit and look at it and go like, why'd they write that? That doesn't sound right, does it? And he didn't know theory, and well, neither did I at that age. But we could just tell that, there were some times when something was really hard to play just because it was awkwardly written. Like whoever had done the exercise hadn't really thought about the musical side of stuff. And so we'd talk about that, or we would, part of the hour that we would play together, we'd put on a record of John Philip Sousa. And we had, as I got a little bit older, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we had march books of all Sousa marches. And we'd put on a recording of a military band playing Sousa marches, and we would play along with it. And he'd play the first part, and I would play the second part, because until you can play all the second parts, you don't get to play the first part. And so I had to grow into the fact. But we had a great time playing that. And then, when you're playing the Arbin, there are those duets at the back, and we just loved playing duets together. And so it wasn't like tie little Johnny to the chair, like and sometimes when you see these little kids who are 7 years old that are crazy on the piano, you just wonder what they had to go through to get there. It wasn't like that at all. I don't have any unpleasant memories of those times. I do know that there were times, like I said, that I wanted to go out and play with my friends. It was like, no, this is your practice time. You can go out when we're done. But it wasn't, and it didn't feel like it was over the top. It didn't feel like an hour and a half was too much. I have never asked one of my beginner players, whether it's a beginner in high school or when I taught 5 through 12, I never recommended that they try to play an hour and a half or anything like that.
That's a lot of time on the trumpet.
Yeah. And, but it all worked because, I was getting better. And I think, I think back and for whatever reason, it made the whole process made an impact on me, where I remember things that one of the pieces that we played was a piece called The Singing Band. Now I've got to remember the name. Oh golly. And I'm old enough now where the composer was a really famous, very esoteric kind of composer. And we played it when I was like in 7th grade or 6th grade or something.
I've seen that, or I've come across it. I can't place what it is. I'm going to look it up while we're talking.
It's not played very often because it's but it was a major project for our little grade school band.
So I was going to ask then, so you said your son also played the trumpet. What was that experience like with him, comparing it to your experience with your father? Because I think that tells a lot about, sort of how the generations and.
It was very different, like very, very different. My wife is a grade school band director, and she was his grade school band director. So there was no escape for him. My daughter also played, but there was no escape from the band director because Connie, had him there in school. Now they were in a little Lutheran school where band only met once a week. So we were here and made sure that things were set properly. But I walked with really careful steps. He was born in 1981, and by the time he was 11 years old, that would have been like 92 or somewhere 91 or 92. And by that time, Marian had won 4 national championships. And, there was a lot of pressure there just because, he was not just Jeff. He was the son of the band director at Marian, and so he had a lot of different kind of weight to carry than I did. And the last thing I wanted him to do is to believe that I wanted him to be me or to do what I did, like I'm the band director, so you got to be a band director. I never wanted him or my daughter to feel that, whatever they took. And he ended up playing very well, went to All-State and all kinds of stuff. Didn't want to be a band director, but wanted to play the guitar. Did want to be in a rock and roll band, which he did for a while. And going back, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't want him, and one of my fears was, if you're the son of the band director at Marian, when Marian is being so successful, how do you carry that pressure? That's not an okie dokie thing for anybody.
Yeah, no doubt. My wife and I are sensitive to that. Our children are in 3rd and 4th grade now. And my wife is a cello professor at SIUE. She's very accomplished, and I'm a published composer, and so it's like, it's really hard. We require them to take piano lessons. That's our only thing we do. But I try to stay as hands off as possible. I don't want them to ever feel like I'm their teacher, unless they come to me. Like if one of them comes to me and says, "Can you teach me this?" I'm all in.
From the outside, you can also watch to make sure that they're approaching things well, like they're not falling into a pit. Like I said, when my son started playing the trumpet, I made sure that his embouchure was well set, just so that he was going to have to fight a battle that he didn't need to fight.
Yeah, my daughter was supposed to start saxophone this year, but COVID ended that. So I think next year.
Yeah, COVID is just what a bane to all of our existence.
It is. So I mean, I'll be, it's a saxophone though, so. We'll work on it, but it's not going to be the clarinet or the trumpet where I have to really be diligent in there, the first couple days.
Well, and that, yeah.
I mean, I hate to throw shade at the saxophones, but it's true.
What's funny is I'll tell kids when they'll talk about what they want to play, and I'll say, well, probably one of the easiest things to get a sound out of and to be able to play at the beginning is the saxophone, because literally you can get the thing to sound, and as long as you can press the octave key, you can get almost every note out of the whole range of the horn in short order. But then I said other instruments like the oboe or the trumpet for range or whatever, it's going to take you longer at the front side. But I said the saxophone may be easy in those first couple of weeks or months, but you'll spend a life trying to make it sound good.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, no doubt. That's
beautiful. That is no easy task.
Right, to make the instrument sound good. Plus, the technical demands on that instrument are incredible. And so, it's that thing about music. Something in the beginning may seem easy, but eventually it's going to catch up to you. There's no easy path in what we do.
No, and that's the great thing about it. It is going to be a challenge.
Okay, so the other thing you said is that you knew early on that you were going to be a band director. How did you know as a 5th grader? What kind of band experiences did you have that were so powerful?
It probably is tied with success, because I was a pretty good little player. I know that when I was in 6th grade, we played a Christmas. We played something from the Nutcracker, and in the Arabian Dance, there's an oboe solo that starts on a B flat, above the staff, and we didn't have an oboe. And so Mr. Katz just looked at me and said, "Greg, would you play that?" Because there was a cue. He said, "Could you play that part that's marked for the oboe?" And he said, "Put your mute in." So I put my mute in, and I'm playing this oboe solo that starts on a B flat above the staff, and I'm in 6th grade. And so there was success, and I have to tell you, by the time I was in eighth grade, there was a sixth grader who was a better player than me. There was a trumpet player that was just, he's the trumpet professor at the University of Northern Iowa, Randy Grabowski. Monster player, just a monster. I could play, but he could really play.
Yeah.
There's a certain amount of, when the band is good and the music is good, it just feels a certain way, and I love playing. I could always, I believe that I could always sight read. Maybe if I could go back and listen to myself in sixth or seventh grade, maybe not so much, but I believe that I always could. So that helped move things along. But I just love the way that it felt to be in a group and creating that sound.
Yeah, there's nothing like it.
It was just, I knew that that's what I had to do. And when I got to high school, because of the way that band was, I have to tell you that we had a reunion probably 25 years after we graduated, something like that. Maybe I don't think it was 30, but maybe 25. And we were all coming back to play at a football game. And we were going to march on the field, just like kind of old man step across the field and play. I remember that we drove up to this. We used to practice on a tennis court, and that was where we were all going to meet. So we all met at this tennis court, and I drove up with my horn and got out. As I stepped out of the car, I imagined myself as in the what's the cornfield baseball Iowa?
What is it called? If you build it, they will come.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's terrible that we can't remember.
Anyway, in that movie, there's a place where the doctor is a young baseball player, but in order to save Kevin Costner's daughter, he has to leave the field, and he knows that he's going to not be able to go back on the field. And as his foot steps across the line, the shoe changes, and he becomes the doctor. And as I stepped out of the car, I thought that I felt the same way, like my shoe was changing, and all of a sudden I was back in high school. And the feeling of pride in that group, was palpable. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I said, this is going to be the best reunion band that anybody has ever had, because that's just the way the LP band is. And that feeling inspired me throughout high school. And so my goal was not just to be a band director. I wanted to be a high school band director. I never wanted to be a college director. I didn't want to be a middle school director. I didn't want to be a military band director. I wanted to be a high school band director. And that was it. And it still is, as far as that goes.
Yeah. So, because my next question to you was going to be why a band director? Why not, Bud Herseth?
I don't have an answer for that. I used to love playing.
Well, I think you gave it.
As I was going through high school, I loved playing along with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and pretending that I could play like Lou Soloff. But obviously, that wasn't me. But that was never a thing for me. I just never fantasized about being a professional trumpet player, or thought about it, or thought that's what I wanted. I wanted to be a good player, but that was never a thing that I wanted to do. It was all band.
Greg, let's just briefly touch on, where did you go to college? Where'd you get your degree?
I went to Illinois State University from 70 to 74. And I taught for 2 years after that in a little school out near Monmouth, on the other side of Monmouth. And I lived in a town with 200 people, Little York, Illinois. And I lived above a feed store for 2 years. And so you can imagine, I was at home there. I felt very comfortable there. I taught for 2 years, and I was offered a chance to go to Western Illinois University. My high school director had moved to Western by that time, and he offered me an assistantship to come down and do my graduate work there. And so I did. And so it was ISU, 2 years off, and then Western Illinois. During those times, I think that one more thing that I could say is that my ISU experience, the highlight was my student teaching with a guy named Bruce Hammett in Fairbury, Illinois, a little farm town. High school was Fairbury Cropsey with, a couple, I don't know how many 100 kids, maybe 300-400 kids at most. And he was an excellent teacher and a wonderful human being. And he loved bands and band music too. And so we spent hours listening to bands and talking about bands and, laughing too. We had a great, great time. But in my time at ISU, he's the one that had the most significant impact on me. During those times when you're at college, you go through all kinds of stuff, especially in the early 70s. And you wonder, okay, am I going to be okay to do this? Is this going to be, and the first time I got to conduct a band at Fairbury, we were at a rehearsal, and I had looked at the music. I was going to do Joy by Robert Logan. It's J-O-I, Joy. So I'd studied, as much as I knew how to study at that time. And he said, I'd like you to do just start the rehearsal and rehearse Joy. And he said, when you feel like you've done enough, and anytime you want to step off, and he said, I'll finish the rehearsal. So, he just said, go as long as you want to go. Well, I went out and did the whole rehearsal. I was just like a pig in slop, and when I finished, I walked into his office, and he looked up, and his eyes were pretty big, and he said, I think you could be pretty good at this. And those words of encouragement at that particular time were everything. And because of that, our relationship absolutely it grew and was amazing. And he also did some stuff. We learned about each other, and he changed some of the way that I looked at things. When I was that age, everything was black and white, and I thought that I would just swing a hammer at anything that got in my way. And to a degree, that stayed true, except he would question me on stuff. I remember specifically one time he asked me, he just said, okay, Greg, you've got band camp coming up. And the last 2 days of band camp, your student Billy has to go to the 4-H fair and show his cow. And so he's not going to come to band camp those 2 days. He's going to miss those 2 days of band camp. What are you going to do? And I didn't hesitate at all. I said, I'll throw him out. He's not going to show up if he's not going to show up at my band camp, he's not going to march. He's not going to be part of my band. He doesn't deserve to be there because he's not showing up. And Bruce just smiled and in his normal, very calm way said, okay, so what you've done, along with hurting the band because you've lost a player, you've taken music out of Billy's life only because he is following what he is going to do for the rest of his life for those 2 days. He is going to be a farmer. He is going to raise cows. That's the center of his learning right now. And you're saying, if you go to the center of your learning, I'm going to take music away from you for the rest of the time you're in high school. And I was like, oh, hadn't thought of that. And so it absolutely changed the way that I looked at things. And, that conversation is still as clear as day. And it happened in the spring of 1974. So
that's a really important point because, kids have other interests and we're not the center. Just because music is everything to us, it doesn't mean it's everything to those kids. I remember being in high school, and I was a senior in high school, and I was on the basketball team, and we had a jazz band trip to a jazz festival, and I was the lead trumpet player. And so I told the basketball coach, hey, I'm going to miss this game because I'm going with the band. And he's like, how dare you miss the basketball? And, so like 5-10 years later, I'm like a band teacher in town. And I remember going to him and saying, look, I'm a band teacher. I'm not a basketball player. I was never going to the NBA. I mean, it's just priorities and perspective, and we're not.
And responsibilities and the balance of all those. And part of that's the learning process for the kids.
Yeah, sure.
I just got an email from a trombone player who next week, we only get to rehearse on Tuesday nights right now because of COVID. Part of the band is here, part of the band is there. The only time we can get the whole group together is on Tuesday nights. And we have a concert on Wednesday. We're going to finish, the concert sequence. And he said, I just found out from my track coach. Now, the coaches at Marian are notorious for changing things at the last minute and coming up with games and all kinds of stuff that, by all intent and purposes, you should just be able to put your foot down and go like, no, because you just told me now. The problem is it's not the kids who are making those decisions, it's the coaches. And overall, though, the coaches have worked well with us. And the track coaches like that. She's very good, but he said, Coach has told me that we have a track meet next week on Tuesday night at Bennett, and he said, I'm going to, no matter what happens, I'll be there at the beginning of rehearsal at 4:30. And I said, well, first of all, we're changing the rehearsal because we know that there are going to be some athletic conflicts. We're going to start at 5:30 instead of 4:30. And we'll put the hour on the back end, and that's going to make it a little bit easier. And then I said, if you look at the map, going from Bennett to here is an hour travel time. And so just work that into your plans, and we're going to make it work. And so he is going to run the track meet, and then he'll come to practice. At least that's the way we left it for right now. He'll be somewhat late to practice, but you really have to always find the balance. It doesn't mean that you always have to say, go do that and don't come to band. And it also doesn't mean that you never should say, you know what, don't worry about band today, just go and run track. It really is a matter of sensitive balances for you and the team and for the band and the team and the coach and you and everybody. We used to have a thing. We have our competitive marching band has football players. And the way that we've always handled football players is if there's a conflict on a Saturday, most often it's freshmen because the varsity plays on Fridays. So if we have a conflict, if we have a contest and freshmen have a game on a Saturday, I go to the freshman coach and we just talk through it. Okay, I got these 4 guys on your team. Tell me about them. Who do you need? Is one the starting quarterback? Is one going to sit the bench the whole time? And we'll decide where they're supposed to go and then tell them so that they know hear from the coach or me, you have to choose. Because as soon as we make them choose, then they're choosing sides and they can't escape the feeling of that. So if we tell them we've discussed it and the best place for you to go is here, and that'll work for everybody, and years over the years, we've had many different things like that. I remember one football player who was I think he was the backup quarterback. I'm pretty sure he was the backup quarterback. I didn't think he was the number 3. I think he was number 2. And we had a contest, and he came to me. He's a freshman, and I said, "We need you to go to the game." He said, "Mr. Bimm, I'm the backup quarterback. Billy has never been tackled. Like he's fine. I'm going to sit the bench as the backup quarterback like I do every week." He said, "I'd rather go to the to the band contest." And I said, "I've talked with coach, and let's just be safe." And sure enough, starting quarterback got hurt at the game. And so the backup quarterback was there and he could do what he needed to do. And so, it may easily have turned out the other way too, where he did sit the bench for no reason, but sure. In trying to, if they see the adults around them striking a good balance and being responsible about those balances, it helps them to see that they can be responsible too.
Yeah. It's a powerful lesson for them too. I my first band director job was at a boys Catholic school in California. So I learned very quickly where the priorities lay. Yep. But the athletic director and most of the coaches, for the most part, were really supportive of me. And, so it worked out. But yeah, those were good lessons in the early years that I learned the hard way. All right, Greg. So, we've been talking for quite a while and we haven't really touched on. So I know we could kind of go down a rabbit hole here. But I don't know how many of my listeners realize just how historic a place you're in right now. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about Marian Catholic and bands at Marian Catholic.
Band has been, the band has been successful I've been there 44 years and the band has been, really successful, I guess, if you want to just call it that, from the standpoint of competitive performances. I don't know whether you want me to talk about I'm stumbling on those words because there are some pretty significant numbers. 7 national champions, and we won our class at the state championship 40 years in a row. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff, but it's not about the trophies, because I've had kids say stuff like, look at the trophies. Yeah, all those, they are dust collectors at this point. They do represent a day when the band performed well enough so that learned people thought they were good performers that day. And if you can focus on that, then we're okay. The band, when I went to Marian, had about 70 people. And at that time, there were 1,500 kids in the school. It started to be successful, and the success of the band in those early years was really based on pursuing concert literature. It wasn't based on winning marching contests. We were pursuing having a good marching band for sure, but the biggest excitement for the first number of years was the music that we were going to play with the symphonic band. I remember going from the Persichetti Symphony one year, like 81 or so, to Masquerade the next year in 82, to what do we play the third year, 83? Rocky Point Holiday and Sketches on a Tudor Psalm. And in 84, we played the John Barnes Chant Symphony and Pines of Rome. And so the level of literature was growing exponentially, as were the numbers. The numbers went, in my first year at Marian, 70, 90, 120, 150, 170. And then it was between there and 190 for a while, and then jumped up past that. We peaked out one year. We actually had 300 kids in band. For most of those years, this is like in the 90s, the later 90s, we were between 280 and 300, and we stayed there for a while. And then we're way smaller than that right now, or we're considerably smaller. Marian is about 890 students right now, because the south suburbs have changed religious demographics. There are, when I came here, we had probably 9 Catholic high schools that were main feeders to the overall Marian system. We got a lot of good players from public schools, but and now there are 2 local, as of next year, there will be 2 local Catholic schools. And so that has had a pretty profound impact. And from a financial standpoint, the south suburbs, starting at around 2007 with the housing crunch, we took a huge hit. Like, the whole south suburbs are considerably more depressed than they were. And if you have a tuition of $11,000 a year, and the per capita or the household income is $40,000, you can't really, afford that. And so we're the school is smaller. We still have 20% of right now we have 20% of the school in band, which is a huge percentage. I know some schools, if they had 20% of the school in band, they'd have 1,500 kids. Or 1,200 kids.
Sure.
So that part's doing pretty well. The band grew as players first, and then they started to have success in marching band, and that helped. That's kind of a high profile sort of thing, and that helped draw more interest. The more interest helped make it stronger and better. But it has always been this symphonic band. We by 92, we played at the first Bands of America National Concert Festival, and I think we played there 3 times, I think now, and we played at the state convention 4 or 5 times, I think. And so we've been really active in playing in different circumstances, and keeping it's been very important to keep the concert band the center of the program. It's as long as you can keep your eye on the music, you're in good shape. Sometimes you have to keep your eye off the trophy wall.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that. That's coming. So Greg, I want to, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, make you uncomfortable about talking about your own success. I know that sometimes can be difficult, but I mean, you've had a terrific career and program, and you're certainly someone who a lot of us in the profession look to as one of the, the leaders of what we do. So my apologies for that.
Well, one of the things I about that is because we had some early success, we were able to have a pretty big impact, I think, early on in marching band. In the late 70s and the earliest 80s, 1980, around there, everybody was trying to sound like a drum corps. And so everything was written brass heavy, and the woodwinds were relegated to filling out the forms and the outskirts, and even then, back then, they didn't even have any woodwind features that they have now, which sort of is the go-to hiding point to say, yes, woodwinds are important. Sorry, that's a very opinionated thing to say, but we had a chance in the early 80s and well into the 80s and 90s to create a thing where having a concert band sound outside was the focus. And that was a big part of our success and a big part of what I was most happy with. I do our arrangements along with the drill. And so I can always write for who we have and what I know. But my ear naturally goes to a concert band sound. Like, what do I want this to sound like? And very seldom is it brass heavy. It's, I want to hear clarinets and flutes and saxophones and things. And so that was a real specific part. And that was one of the key things that back in those days, there was a lot of talk about how marching bands were ruining concert bands. That was in the 80s. That was a huge, huge thing. And we were able to be part of the solution, not the solution, but we were part of it by having a concert band sound outside and making sure that our concert band was absolutely solid. In one case, actually, after we won Grand Nationals the first time in '85, and John Painter invited us after that to come down to the National Concert or the National Band Association convention in Knoxville. And he said, what I'd like you to do is perform the show that you just won Grand Nationals with. And then I want you to, at the same convention, I want you to bring the symphonic band in and play. And so we did that. We went down, we did the show that we had won nationals with. And then I think it was the next day, we went in and played Celebration Overture, Paul Creston, Mysterious Mountain, Alan Hovhaness, Profanation, Leonard Bernstein. I mean, it was a heavy program that, because the whole point was to say, you can do both if you want to do both. And so that was
I want to talk about this idea of excellence. And can I convey what Bobby said on the show, Bobby Lambert?
Sure.
So he told me an anecdote about you. And it's good. And he said it was his first marching band. So now let me set the stage for the listeners. So Bobby Lambert is the band director at Wando High School in South Carolina, but he was your assistant for a few years, correct?
13 years.
13 years, your assistant. And so he told the story of his first marching band rehearsal without you there. And how he was out in the field and he felt like he didn't know what he was doing and like he didn't have any sort of clue. And then you drove up and he thought to himself, oh, Greg's here. This is great. He's going to save me. And you got out to scold the students for having left a McDonald's bag on the bus. And yes. He told it in the context of you. That's you figure that you expect them to behave a certain way. You expect your students to behave a certain way in everything that they do.
And it is not a perfect world. To think that all of the students are perfect, that's not it. But just because they're not doesn't mean you shouldn't set the expectations there. And we talk. Well, there are two levels to this. One, if you're willing to compromise with stuff like that, that's not a mindset that's going to make you a great performer. You're going to compromise other places as well. But part of it is the social side of things. Is one of the reasons that we tell kids that they're practicing and they're working hard is because they have a responsibility to everyone else. They have to carry their load. And our rule is to do the best you can. You do your best. And if everybody does their best, we're going to be very successful. The fact is, though, that everybody has to be responsible to do their best. And part of that is to realize that leaving junk on the band room floor, or leaving a McDonald's bag after lunch, you're expecting somebody else to pick up after you. And there's a big social lesson that we learn from that. There's I'll tell you the whole story. We had a maintenance man when I was first at Marian. I was not married my first year there, and so I had no place to go. I was living above a garage in a one-room apartment, and so there's no reason for me to go home. I had a little bitty TV that you hardly see anyway, and I could have fun in the band room. So I would finish school and finish sectionals, then I'd go and get dinner at a little Italian place. They did sandwiches, and then I'd go. There was a music store in town named Musart Music, and they actually had it was a big thing back then. It was a big successful company, and they handled band music. So they had a library in the back of the room. They had all their stuff, and so I would finish getting a sandwich at it was a place called Marnell's, and I just down the block from Musart. I'd go to Musart with a cup of coffee and sit in the back room with all those band scores and just read scores. And at 9 o'clock, without fail, the owner, Dean Sayre, who was a great guy, would come back and say, "Greg, time to leave, man. I got to lock up." And so 9 o'clock, I'd close the last score and, leave. And when I left, I'd go back to Marian and just hang out in the band room and, do more band geeky stuff. But there was a maintenance man named Lee Porter, and he was a very gentle soul. And he would come in and we were in his night area. He was the one of the overnight maintenance guys, and he would vacuum the band room floor. And whenever his vacuum played, if I remember, it was either an F or E flat. I think it was E flat. That it would just drone, and I would play. I'd get my horn out and just play over the top of his droning vacuum cleaner, and so we had a nice relationship. And the story now gets a little bit ugly, and for a lot of reasons, especially when you consider the current times that we live in. Mr. Porter was an African American, which I've never told the kids that. I just tell them the story, and they can find their own truths. But in 1984, Mr. Porter was still working there, and they were doing a construction on part of the building right by the band room. And so the band room proper was closed, and I was in a little corridor, small room, and one of the maintenance men had gotten into a small ticket booth, which had nothing in it. It was just a floor and a ticket booth. And for whatever reason, he decided that was where he was going to go to the bathroom. He didn't go out to a porta potty. He just went on the floor, and not just the simple kind of bathroom. Like, it was as bad as you can imagine. And I remember that the person in charge at that time called Mr. Porter and had him clean it up. And I think back to that and think about how awful that was. And I tell the kids that story every year. Like, if you walk in the band room and say Lee Porter, everybody knows Mr. Porter. Everybody knows the story. And what we talk about after that is the assumption that the construction guy felt that he was so superior that it was okay for him to leave that kind of a mess for someone else to clean up. And it fell on Mr. Porter's shoulders to clean up the mess left by the construction guy. And it is so obviously a terrible, terrible thing. It is so obviously wrong that there's no mistaking how wrong it is. And the context becomes this. If you have a McDonald's bag and leave a McDonald's bag on the band room floor for somebody else to pick up, it's the same philosophy. It's not as messy, it's not as vulgar, but it is exactly the same philosophy. I am so important that somebody lesser than me is going to pick up after me. And you can't use the excuse, well, it's for maintenance to do or for the janitor to clean up because they're paid for that. No, they're paid to clean what is a natural thing. Like the floor is going to get naturally dirty. They're paid to clean that. They're paid to make sure that that things are working around the building. They're not paid to pick up after you. And so as soon as that gets established, people start to think a little bit differently. It's not perfect, but they start to realize that. And then that can go to, if you're in a section of trumpets and there are 8 of you playing and there's a part to be played and you don't practice so that you can't do your best and you're relying on the other 7 to do their best, that's the same philosophy. And so we spend a long time learning about that. And it's a key to who we are. It's a key to why things work the way that they work at Marian Catholic. And it has nothing to do with playing in tune, it's one of the reasons we play in tune when we do, but it has nothing, that's not the center of focus. The center of focus is personal responsibility, making sure that we are all of the same. Nobody is above the other, no matter how well you play. The best player doesn't have the right to leave a McDonald's bag on the floor so the worst player can pick it up. That's not the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, no, it's a great life lesson too.
Yeah, and whenever we find a teaching moment like that, we jump on it. And for that day, then when I took the McDonald's stuff out there, that was the most important thing they learned that day. We were together probably 4 hours. That's how long those rehearsals normally were. We were together 4 hours, and probably the most important thing they learned was pick up after yourself and don't have somebody else have to don't feel superior to someone else.
Yeah, no, that's a terrific lesson. One of the things, I've talked to so many amazing musicians and band directors over the course of this show, and one thing that always comes through is the idea of culture. You can be an outstanding musician, you can be a wonderful teacher, but if you don't have a good band culture, then you're not going to kind of take that next step. And so what I would wonder is, for my younger band directors who are listening, what advice would you give them on building that culture? Now, they just heard your story, so that's a great one, but is there anything else that goes into that?
Live it. Be the example.
Okay.
If something needs to get moved, I try to be, to the degree that the first one to grab it, the first one to start moving, the first one to make a motion to make things better. Just because if you're going to expect that from the students, it has to be absolute from you. Otherwise, they're not going to pick up on it. They will do what they see. They'll believe in you. If you're walking the walk, they'll walk it with you. But and that's a really important thing. And it's not walking the walk for show. It's just walking the walk because it's the right thing to do. And I think that's a big part of it for me is being truthful about it.
Yeah, there's no question of that. How about musically then? To the same audience, is there something that you can look back and say, this is a key to what I do? Is there we're always trying to unlock the secrets, right? Even though you can't really unlock them, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I over my life, I've been lucky enough to meet some pretty good folks. And, I was able to be a guide for Ravelli when he came to Western Illinois. And so I got to spend a couple of days walking with him and stuff. And he said 2 things. One was a very surprising one. There was a band that was playing that was quite good, but very, very, it was so strict that, it was like everybody sat like little robot soldiers and everything was defined to the absolute max. And I was sitting next to Ravelli, because I was his guide, and he leaned over and he bumped me and he said, they were playing the Alcotts by Ives, very sensitive. And he said, what's wrong with that band? And so immediately I started to turn my ears as high as I could and go, well, the French horns are a little bit sharp. And I went on with a couple of more things. He said, no. And that was in typical Ravelli fashion. He just shut the door on me pretty hard. He said, they're over-regimented. Which, this is Ravelli, Mr., the dictator of the band world. saying that they're overregulated, and so they're not playing any music. And that meant a lot. But the biggest thing that he said to me, because I said, what would be your advice? And he said, wear the seat of your pants out studying your scores. And that to me is the single biggest thing. I on another time, I was backstage. We were going to conduct a band. I don't want to be more specific just because I don't want to do that.
Absolutely.
I was standing with John Painter backstage at this thing we're going to conduct, and he looked over and he just said, if you watch people conduct, you can tell who the guys are that really study their music and those who don't. And I was like, and I know he was pointing, that he was making it a lesson for me, not because he believed that I was Mr. Score Study guy or anything like that. I hadn't impressed him at all necessarily, but he wanted to make sure that I saw that. And in truth, it's true, and you can find that. And so, from every direction, it seems that it's a matter of studying your music. Now, the most important thing is to make sure that the kids stay in the center. Like you're centered on the kids, their music, making sure the music comes from them. All of that stuff is really, really important. But if you're going to make music, you have to know it. Like you have to know all about it. You want to take it apart and find out, why is this chord? Why is it going to be? What problems is this going to have? It's just a simple B flat major chord, but the trumpets are playing the bottom line E. Well, if you haven't already taught them to play with their third valve, you might want to take the time to just say, be sure that on this big chord, make sure that you use your third valve, because 1 and 2 is always going to be a little bit sharp, and it's a third of the chord. Every reason on the planet you want it to be less. If it's already going to be sharp, you got to do double duty on it to bring it in tune where it needs to be. And you want to try and find things like that and just look for the issues, but also you have to live with it enough so that it becomes part of you. You're not just accepting things at face value. I've seen times when I'll watch somebody who maybe is even a composer of quite great note, who will play something, and I know that they've underestimated the tune. I know that they have just thought, well, this is just a real simple this, so I can do this. And I know that they haven't lived with it enough or thought about it enough so that the phrases really sing. And you can also see on the other side when somebody does know it well enough. Bob Reynolds, when he conducted First Suite in E flat at Midwest a couple of years ago, that was life-shattering. It was so good. I mean, he just absolutely hit everything that he could have. I mean, in my opinion, it was just the pacing and everything about it was just magnificent. I'm trying to remember who it was. It was an older. Oh, I know who it was. It was Mark Kelly, an older band director. And I saw him conduct at an ABA convention, and he did Ye Banks and Braes o' Bonnie Doon by Percy Grainger. It's a really very basic tune. You don't have to have a lot of chops to play it, but it was perfect. And the players were good, but it wasn't just because he had chosen exactly the right pace. Every phrase sang just like it should have. And a lot of times, I've seen some bands at Midwest who could play the notes off the page. I mean, like you can't find a flaw. Like the players are just great. These some of the high school bands, they can just kill it. But you walk out going like, I don't think they played one phrase in that. The music never got to the point of singing at all. It never got to the place where you can find a beautiful phrase. I could tell you a story about score study. The story is actually about Arnold Gabriel, conductor of the Air Force Band. When we played in 1992 at the Bands of America First National Concert Festival, I wanted to do something special. and I had heard Medea's Meditation and Dance of Vengeance, Samuel Barber. And I looked all over for a band arrangement, and there wasn't any. I mean, like, I could not find anything. I knew there wasn't one that was published at that time. And I looked, and I found a reference where it said that there was a band in France that had played it at some point. But I'm going like, okay, I'm going to have to write my own. And so I did a transcription of it. I started at Christmas and finished it by the end of Christmas break. And we played it at the National Concert Band Festival in March of that year, March of '92. And I was really happy with it. Well, Arnold Gabriel was our clinician. After the concert, we went downstairs, and he worked a little bit. Our march was Fliegermarsch by Herman Dostal. And he worked a little bit on that, and then he worked on Medea. And he's just doing some stuff and saying, think about this. And it had been some stuff that I had said, but I hadn't said it well enough for it to come through the way that he wanted it to come through. Fixed a few things. And then towards the end of the clinic, he looked at me and he said, do you mind if I have some fun? And I was like, you're Arnold Gabriel, man. You can do whatever you want. And so he looked at my score, which was all hand done, like everything was written in pencil. And he looked at my score, found the letter. It's where the dance starts, and it is just hard to get through from there to the end. It is, it puts you way on the edge to make it all work and to hold everything together. And so he looked down, and I don't know whether it was G or H or whatever it was, but he looked at the band and said, letter H. And then he closed the score and conducted the thing from memory from there to the end. And I'm like, how in the world? Come to find out, years before, he had, I think it wasn't Floyd Worley, it was the harpist that did so many transcriptions for him. I'm not going to get his name. Anyway, he had him do a transcription, and they had performed it. Well, Gabe learned it so well then that he still had it in his head all those years later, and he just killed it. And I'm going like, oh man, as he's going on and on and on, I'm feeling smaller and smaller and smaller, and it was just a matter that when he learned the score, he learned it so well that he could do it from memory that long after. And so that's the score study thing.
So, Greg, before we go on to the final questions, there's one question I want to ask you, and it's kind of a big one, so I guess we kind of need to be a little careful how deep into the rabbit hole we want to go. But, one of the things that I'm interested in is a little bit of the history of the band world. We know that there's sort of places where band has been more important and less important over the years, and places where it's grown. Texas has assumed a more important role in the band community than, say, the early days. Chicago was a central place in the band community for a long time, and still to a certain extent is. I mean, we all go there in December. Can you talk a little bit about the legacy of the Chicago band community and band directors?
Sure, it goes back as far as bands go.
Yeah, no, I know.
I mean, when you go back to the beginning, there's Hobart with Ravelli, and that's only 20 miles into Indiana, and Joliet, which is the other side of Chicago, in Illinois, and they were the go-to schools. But there were also just tons of extraordinary high schools and high school band programs through the suburbs. It's very interesting. I always joke about how to a degree the top quality programs kind of followed as money shifted around. I should say new developments shifted around the Chicago suburbs. So did the schools, but there are still wonderful, wonderful concert bands up here that have been around for a long time. I'm trying to think. Well, I mentioned Willowbrook for a number of years, but I shouldn't even try to mention one, because Percy has had a great program with Scott and a long time ago. But there is the band, the strength of band legacy is Chicago, and it's sort of tied. Well, it's actually tied in two directions. It's tied to U of I, of course, which is a kind of a band mecca, and then Northwestern is still a great band, if you will, school, but with Glenncliff Bainham and then John Painter, the history is very, very strong. And so it still is a Mecca. Things are different here than in other places. One of the things with Texas, they have some wonderful programs, and they have their school systems are set up in ISDs, which really is a coordinated school system from the beginning, from by my understanding, from kindergarten through high school. And because of that, the band programs can be organized and coordinated from the time you pick up your horn all the way until you get out of high school. In places like Illinois, that same kind of coordination doesn't exist, especially to the same degree. And so it's a little bit of a different kind of world. But the band programs up here, are really, really, really good. If you go to the Superstate festival that they have at U of I every year except the last two, you'll hear magnificent concert bands, and especially still from the Chicago area.
I think it's interesting the way the development of the band centered around these geographical places: Chicago, Cincinnati, to a certain extent, the Lehigh Valley in the early days with Patrick Gilmore and, that stuff. And, there's just sort of these little places, these spots where it grew and sort of spread out from there across the country. It's just fascinating to me that, to look at that.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those centers of history, band history.
Yeah. You feel it too.
Yeah, I have a quick history story that is something that I just found out this year. When I was in high school, my algebra teacher had been involved with bands, and that's all I knew, that he had been involved with bands. He had played the flute from what I understood, but he had lost part of his finger, so he didn't play anymore. He was old at the time when I was a freshman, but everybody seemed old. But he was pretty much towards the end of his career. His name was Lee Peterson, and he had a very strange way of teaching algebra. Everything was repetition and rote response. Like we'd go through problems that we had to solve, and if for everything that you had to do, he had a rule that you would recite back to him. For instance, if you end up having a positive and a negative number, basically what you do, if you've got +5 and -8, that ends up to be -3. The way you find that is this: plus and a minus, take the difference and give the answer the sign of the larger. And if you think about it, that's how you do that. Every time there was a positive and negative number in a problem in algebra during my entire freshman year, Mr. Peterson would click his fingers and we all go, plus and a minus, take the difference and give the answer the sign of the larger. We repeated stuff ad infinitum, and I always wondered how it was so strange that we learned that way. Well, this year I found out that Mr. Peterson was part of the very beginning of Midwest. He conducted the first year of Midwest, and he was the first executive treasurer, executive secretary, whatever the Barbara Buellman post was. He was the first one, and he was that for a number of years, like 13 years. All the way, he finished, his last year was 1969, which was when I was a junior in high school. So while he was my algebra teacher, he was helping to run Midwest before I even knew Midwest existed. And so all these years later, I'm 69 years old. I'm looking at this book going like, actually what I was just surfing the web, and I looked up Hobart, Indiana, and they had some programs on a website from Hobart. And there was a thing from Midwest, and his name was listed. I went, I wonder if that's the same Peterson. And sure enough, it's Lee Peterson from LaSalle, Peru. My algebra teacher from my freshman year helped to run Midwest for almost 20 years. And so it's this strange world that we live in that is so interconnected. But I've started this long before even this year. I tell people to keep their eyes open and keep their ears open, because you never know who you're in the presence of.
Remember your first term of teaching? Learning all the skills that you don't get taught in music school? Managing a transitioning culture in your classroom? finding out that you have to teach guitar this term? During those early years, we found out that leaning on a community of music educators was important, not only for building that knowledge in ourselves, but also maintaining enough sanity to serve the students right in front of us. Amused is a podcast centered around a community of music teachers. Between the four of us, we teach choir, band, orchestra, general, jazz, and marching band at the elementary through collegiate levels. We certainly don't have all the answers, but you're welcome to listen in while we try to find them. Join us while we work through the challenges of music teaching and celebrate the joy of bringing music making into the lives of young people. In each episode, you'll hear stories, both good and bad, about that week of teaching, and we'll try and tackle an issue that one of us is struggling with. Something we're all taught is that music brings people together, but being the only teacher in your subject at a site can be really isolating. We think everyone ought to be a part of a community, and you're welcome to come join ours. Episodes come out on Wednesdays during the school year, and you can find us wherever you get your podcasts and at amusedcast.org.
All right, Greg, let's get on to the final questions because we've been going for a while. So I ask this set of questions of all my guests, not to kind of create controversy or anything like that, but just to kind of have a reference to some big issues or what I consider important issues in the band world right now and have people talk about them so that everyone's saying the same thing or answering the same questions, I guess. And so the first of these is, and you've had great success in competitive situations, but where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition?
The answer, I think, is rather simple, but living the solution is fraught with peril. Competition is nothing. The competition this competition can be motivational because you're playing for critical ears who are going to be truthful with you. If we do a performance at home, all of our parents are going to go like, that was just wonderful. That's the best thing I ever heard. Even if it's something that they don't understand because it's like crazy, they'll go, that sounded so hard, but it was just so good. When you're playing in a competition sort of circumstance, you're playing for critical ears, critical eyes. When you're also playing for an audience that appreciates what you're doing. Like when we go to Grand Nationals, you're playing for an audience that is there to see marching bands. And so it's a very rewarding experience that way. The competition side can be very motivational that way, just because you know that you are going to be held responsible. Sort of like people study for tests. And that motivation can be good. Being around other bands that are working at their peak can be inspirational. And it can be a thing where, you want to be like all of these great things that you hear or see. And so the competition side can be an absolutely wonderful tool. And I believe that it has been at Marian. Like, I don't believe that we would have been able to do all that we've done if we hadn't been competing along the way. The danger comes when you're trying to win. You have to be able to compete without having to win. And I have a couple of different stories that are, I learned early on that some people, it is all about winning. There was a guy here in the state that had a very, very successful band. And I went to visit him when I was my first year at Marian. And they had just won ISU and won all of the captions and won everything. And the principal came out, was talking to him. And the first thing the principal said was, well, how'd the kids look on Saturday? And my thought was, well, they must look pretty good because they kind of trumped everybody. But they had become so used to that was, it didn't mean anything. What meant was the next contest that they hadn't yet won. I also, in talking to that band director, he was working, this was in October, and he was already writing the show that they were going to play the next October. He was already doing the arrangements. They were on his desk. The story goes further, though. We were friends, and they participated in Summer Nationals, the BOA thing, before Grand Nationals got started. And he finally left teaching and went into fundraising. But in 1984, that was the first year that we won Summer Nationals. And so Saturday night comes, we win Summer Nationals. We drive home on Sunday, and Sunday night, I'm sitting at my house, and And the phone rings, and it's this person. And he says, "Greg, congratulations. I'm so proud of you." And I said, "Thank you so much." He said, "Well, now that you've won the big one, what are you going to do?" And I just kind of smiled. I said, "Well, I got kids coming in. I'm going to give some lessons tomorrow." Essentially, we're just going to go on. Winning the big one is not, for him, that was what it was all about. And that's exactly the opposite way that you want to be. It's the winning the big one doesn't matter. The competition side, you have to be very, very careful of. For years, all of my years, especially as I've gotten, it's been more than just recently. It's all the time at Marian. We've talked about doing your best. And I said that before. You do your best. Whatever your best is, that's what you're responsible for. Everybody does their best. We end up being, we'll perform very, very well. And what we've said is we are going to be truthful, and the trophy is not a thing. That's not, and I might even have carried it too far, because there have been times when people haven't really understood the significance of being acknowledged as being the best on that day, because I've underplayed it too much. But better that than the opposite. But all of the time, like if we have won Grand Nationals before, and my first comment to the kids when we get back to where we're staying is, "You're no better right now than you were 2 hours ago before you knew what the results were. You are just the same. If you made a mistake in the show, that mistake is not gone. It's still there. If you did a great show, then it's still a great show. If your show was not good, it's not all of a sudden better just because the band won tonight." And on the other side, when we've finished outside of first, which you have to be careful because you can call that losing, but when we haven't won, we'll come back and I'll say, "You are just as good as you were 2 hours ago." Whatever that is. If your show was great, it still is great. We did a wonderful performance. It still is a wonderful performance. The simple scores, like those things that rank and rate, it could be anything. It could be that the judges were wrong. It could also be that they were really right. And it could also be that they were wrong and you should have been lower. It could be anything. But the fact of the matter is, the competition doesn't make or break anything. And I did that all along, saying that we're here to do our best. Whatever our best is, that's what we're going to do. And what happens afterwards doesn't make a difference. A few years ago, I think 3, maybe 4, I was doing a clinic, doing a band out in, I think we were in Las Vegas. And Mike Colburn from Butler was doing the top band. And he and I were talking in the car. We were talking about competition just like this. And we were, I explained the philosophy that we're just trying to do our best. And I have sold that constantly. Now, the fact of the matter is, we've done really well. We've won an awful lot, and we finished very high an awful lot. And I looked at him and I said, the real tale of the tape will be the year that we don't make finals at Grand Nationals. That's going to be the tale of the tape for us, because that will be the true test. If we don't make finals and everything is held solid, then all that we have been working for, all that we have been preaching for all these years has been proven. And sure enough, 2 years ago, we didn't make finals. For the first time in 34 years, we didn't make finals. And I went back to school and we talked about it. And the kids were disappointed because, they really wanted to play and they didn't get a chance to play at night. And maybe even a little surprised, because that was the first time we had ever not made finals somewhere. We had never not made finals before. But after a conversation and just talking about things and reminders, they were fine. We ate pizza, we laughed, we cleaned up, we had a good time. We went on, we went back, and the band was good the next year, and they practiced. And, so the rule held solid, and that's the point. Competition can be a really great motivator, and it can be a good checkpoint because you're going to get good feedback. and you're going to play for an audience that loves the kind of stuff that you do, but it has to be held in check. And I said that it's a tenuous thing because competition is really seductive. You have to actively make the decision every time that you're going to keep it in the right perspective. It's sort of like any kind of addiction. You have to make, every day you have to say, I'm not going to let competition run my life. Not my life, but run the band. It is not about winning. It is about doing your best. And if you can do that, the motivation is great. And so, and for me, I proved it to myself a couple of years ago. And, I would have much preferred being in finals and having to wait a while to prove it. But the fact of the matter is, that's the way that things happen in the world. And so competition can be very, very dangerous, but it can be a great tool if you make sure that you control it. If you make sure that you keep Pandora in Pandora's box and use the energy the right way.
Yeah, that's really good advice. It's so true. It's so true about competition. I liked that part of it when I was a young band director. It is very seductive, but you got to keep the music and the kids first, and then let the competition work itself out.
Yep, and you have to, again, like I said, you have to walk the walk yourself. You can't compromise things. We had a thing. I teach a class at DePaul every couple of years for marching band. We were talking about just a philosophic thing. I said, okay, so you're getting ready to go into the band contest and your top trumpet player loses their mouthpiece. What are you going to do? And one of them said, well, you go to somebody, at the bottom of the section and just take their mouthpiece and give it to the solo player. And I was like, well, and what have you just told that person that you took their mouthpiece? You don't. You're not important. You don't matter. And we went through other solutions. And I said, now, if you get to somebody, you grab whatever you can, you send whoever you can to anybody and warm up and say, we need a mouthpiece. Can you? Because we would loan a mouthpiece, and anybody would. Or you go to the instrument repair place, or you're prepared enough to carry the extra mouthpieces. But I also said this. I just said, if somebody if one of those younger players at the bottom of the section came forward and said, I want Billy to use my mouthpiece, at that point, you can kill two birds with one stone. You can actually let them use the mouthpiece. And I said, guys, the first thing I said, how would you handle that? And they didn't really have an answer. I said, the first thing that I would do when we marched off the field is we would stop, and I would bring little freshman, whoever, up and say, this is our hero for tonight. We forgot her mouthpiece and she needed, and so everybody applaud because this is true heroism. And so you can teach that person that what they did was absolutely generous and a wonderful act for the good of the band, and at the same, but you always have to keep your head on you. You have to keep your head on.
How have you found a work-life balance?
It's an interesting thing. I've used balance a bunch of times, and it is that, but everybody is wired differently, and so everybody has to find their own balance. And I don't think it's wise to judge anyone else's balance. And so I say that before I say how my balance works, just as a way of setting it, because my balance is this. I love bands. I can do bands 24/7 and I don't get tired. Like when I'm writing in the summer if I'm writing drill or music for people, I can work 14-hour days, Monday through actually Sundays sometimes, like just, like on a treadmill, just going and loving the fact that I'm doing this band stuff. Today we finished, in truth, I finished school at 2:30. One of the jazz bands was practicing after school, and they practiced till 4:15. And so, of course, I'm not in charge of that group, but I was there, did some work, sent out some emails. They finished at 4:15. I talked to my other directors. We talked about a couple of things, and I said, guys, I have a couple of things to do. Please don't feel like you have to stay. And so they were gone by, I don't know, 4:40 or so. And before I knew it, it was 5:30, and I was still sitting at my desk just doing stuff. I ran across something in Facebook today that it actually had to do with chord changes in the tune All by Myself. And it was intriguing to me, and so I kind of went down that rabbit hole for a little while, and then I came home, and my wife was fine, and we set up dinner so that I could have dinner in time to do this, and essentially, I don't have hobbies. Like I don't do anything else. Band is my hobby. Like if you turn me loose, I'll do band.
Yeah, I get it.
And that's fine. And part of it when you are in a marriage, that has to be part of it too. And I am absolutely lucky that Connie is a band director. She teaches in a middle school. Her interests are much broader than mine. But she knows, she likes who I am. I believe she likes who I am. And so this, my total band geekedness is fine, and so we have a great relationship, and it's in balance. We're absolutely happy. I don't think that she would change anything about me. At least, she might change whether I don't pick up a shirt or something like that. But essentially, she wouldn't change the band side of me, and I wouldn't change, of the things of her. We have a balance, and so for me, I read stuff about people feeling burnt out about band, and I'm going like, I can't offer you advice because I've never felt that. I've been teaching since 1974, and I haven't ever felt like I'm done banding yet. And so this COVID time has really taken a toll on me because I haven't been allowed to band enough. Honestly, our daytime rehearsals are so compromised because we have about a third of the group together at a time. And it's never a for sure third because people can slide in and out because of whatever. And they can just call in and say, I'm going to work from home today, like to the school. And so I never really know what the group is going to be like. So it's hard to plan what we're going to do. And you can never really get to the meat of what we're doing except on our Tuesday nights when we're all together. And so if I was going to describe our band rehearsals personally, daytime band rehearsals have been torture for me, like just unconscionable torture. And I don't let it, or I try not to let it project at the kids. I know that they can see frustration from time to time. But COVID has messed with my balance because I can't do band enough. I just feel like, my hands have been tied and I don't get a chance to make music with the kids, and it's all about one, getting them to be good enough to really make great music that's an ongoing challenge that we use all the minutes that we have. But on a daily basis, I get to stand in front of a band in normal times, see their faces, hear their music, share music with them, share phrases with them, and pursue things. Like maybe in a rehearsal, we might only get, we'll play some other stuff, but maybe only one phrase really gets to enough attention to be like, okay, this is good. But it's really rewarding, and it's rewarding to interact with them. And now we have masks, so we can't see their faces, and 2/3 of them are not there at most of the time, and so that my balance is off because I can't do band enough. But my personal balance is band, and most I would say that most people are probably not wired that way.
No, certainly not.
But and rightfully so. Everybody needs to do, if they're I think Dave Holsinger collects toy trains, And I listened to the podcast with Dick from Texas, and they like to go sailing and stuff. He and Cheryl like to go sailing, and I have some friends who are very much into fishing, and for me, I would just as soon do more band, and I've always been that way. So that's my balance. It's my balance, and so I've seen things where people sort of try to convince other directors that they have to back away. Like, you have to back away. Well, it depends on how you're wired. Maybe like there are some people that if they don't get their time, it's not healthy for them. But I think COVID has proven to me that if I don't get my band time, it's not healthy for me. Like, I am not a happy person because I don't get the band enough.
Yeah, it changes over the course of a life too. When I was a young second year director, single, much like you, I spent most of my time focused on the band. But it changes depending on how old your kids are, what stage of life.
Sure. Well, and banding for me is a whole lot of things. It could be just listening to bands. It could be just pursuing tunes. And that all is sort of the same thing for me. And I have had to adjust as I've gotten older because when I was young, my brain wouldn't really start working as far as being really creative until about 10 or 10:30 at night. And then from 10:30 at night until 2 or 3 in the morning, man, I was just on fire. There were times when I'd be stumble bumming through writing a drill. And then 10:30, I'd go like, oh, I have an answer. And then for the next 4 or 5 hours, I'd just be on fire and I'd come out with all kinds of things finished. And then I could go to bed for 3 hours or 3.5 hours and get up the next day and, shake it off and just keep running for a long. And now I'm older and I can't do that. Now I do have to rest more. And that even there are sometimes, like right before that Tuesday rehearsal that we rehearse on Tuesdays starting at 4:30, and there have been sometimes on those Tuesdays that at 4 o'clock I just kind of shut my door and close my eyes for 10 minutes. Just I put my phone on my chest, set 10 minutes so that it's gonna. I make sure that I don't I'm not going to be late or anything like that, but just so that I can kind of gather myself. I do have to slow down a little bit because I'm almost set. So.
It's a tough place because I find myself sometimes the same thing. It'll be like 10 o'clock and I'm getting my best ideas and a piece is coming up in a week or two. But sometimes you have to just say, listen, live to fight tomorrow. Because, if you don't get it done tonight and you spend all your energy
Well, I've made that mistake before.
Yeah, because now you're stuck because now the next day is shot.
now you're scrambling a little bit.
Right. Yeah. So it's, that you don't bounce back as quickly as you age.
Right. I've been, absolutely happy spending, I guess what probably 90% of the population would say inordinate hours doing what I love to do. And luckily, what I love to do is what I'm hired to do. It's my profession. And so I'm one of the lucky guys that, my profession is what I got to do.
All right. So this next question is the big one, and just answer your perception of it. You don't have to try to solve the world's problems. Just kind of getting your sense of how you feel the trends are. What are the challenges facing music education and band, and how do we best meet them?
Well, the first challenge that we all face is coming out of COVID. Like that weighs very heavily on my mind right now, because I feel like we could have lost our culture in it's almost 2 full years. It's a year and a half, but it's 2 concert seasons have been COVID affected and a full fall has been COVID affected. And it would be very easy to be able to lose the culture of leadership and things at Marian. And so making sure that we come out of COVID strongly enough Obviously all of the directors that I'm talking to are concerned about numbers and retention and all that. And we just have to fight the best fight that we possibly can, using every tool that we can to keep as many kids as we can. But there's a bright spot that I thought about the other day with coming out of COVID, and that is if there is a flaw, like going into COVID, if there was something that was flawed in your culture, or if there was something that you didn't know how to change, like we now have the perfect break to change. Like we can adjust the culture by just saying, okay, we're going to get back to the way things were. We're going to get back to our normal band culture, which includes this and this and this and this, and in that this and this and this and this, you can tweak the stuff that you need to tweak. And so there's a real plus side to that part.
I told this to my principal a couple of weeks ago. She asked me, what are you looking forward to for next year? What do you want to change? We do this kind of faculty review thing. And I said, I'm looking forward to the opportunity to restart and reshape this in a better image, because, we're always trying to get better than what we have. And she was like, really? And I just like, yeah, this is great. I mean, I'm going to be sad that I won't have the numbers. We're not going to make the same kind of music, but boy, it's like planting a seed that's going to grow stronger. It'll take a couple years, but it'll be better than it was.
Yeah, we can get a redo, or a reset, which is, it's been very costly to get to that point, but at least there's a plus side.
Yeah, I just try. You got to look on the positive side too. Otherwise, what are we doing?
Going forward, I think that there are some things that are very strong, in our communications, and our band world is ever more interconnected, and I think that's a real plus. One of the things, to be real truthful, that worries me is the direction of marching bands. To be absolutely truthful, I'm in the mix. Like we're still doing this, but the amount of resources that get pushed into marching band in order to be considered, I guess is one way to put it, or to be successful. Because I remember on Dick Floyd's thing, he said, "We'll teach to the test." And that's the best way to say it. Like whatever is demanded, or whatever the judges credit, that's what people will do. And so I'm not positive that we're on the best trajectory from a musical standpoint. We have gone, in my opinion, we've gone backwards a little bit as far as what we're playing, how we're playing it, and in order to make it entertaining, in my opinion, we've taken some of the meat out of it. Like I don't know how many times I've heard people say, this is taking too long. Like music is about growth. Music is about having a complete idea, and that gets affected, as does instrumentation. We talked about a little bit ago. And by far, though, the biggest thing is the production that's expected, because now you have production from the visual standpoint of props. And, props have been around now for a long time. I remember when there were no props, and I loved it. Props have gotten to be where you can't just create props. They've got to be produced at a professional level. Like there are companies that are making props now because band parents just can't do a good enough job. And so there's a lot of money that has to get pointed in that direction. Now, not everybody has done that. There have been a couple of bands recently that were successful, but the general trend is a lot of glitz and sparkle with props. And the same thing with costumes. There are, one of the drum corps things is dragging with changing costumes every year, and bands haven't really picked up on, well, some bands have who can afford it, but most haven't because we just, don't have that kind of funds. But also, the staff and the writers and all of the stuff that you have to bring to bear to make this, to be competitive and to make the production look like it's fully produced, is the word that people are now using, is incredibly expensive if to get all the right people. We've also added a new thing with the way that electronics are being used. I don't have any qualms with people who are amplifying what the kids are actually playing, like in order to make the sound reach a little bit further without the kids having to overplay, especially if it's not a large group. I get that. There are some groups that over the past have done wireless mics for a number of their students, and then they mix that into the overall sound, which is not necessarily a true representation of the sound. But no matter what you do with it, that's one thing that's a point of discussion. To do electronics well, now you have to have very expensive equipment, and everybody's looking at it. Well, not everybody, but many people are looking at it like we have to have the electronics expert, the guy who's going to run the mixer and do all of the background this and all the background that, and this guy has to be the expert wirer guy to make all of this stuff run. And so we've created a thing where the playing field is not terribly even. The amount of money that it takes to put all those pieces together is pretty crazy. I remember coming off the field at Grand Nationals 3 or 4 years ago and talking to a very successful band director, and that person just said, "Man, this is becoming an arms race, isn't it?" And the answer to that is, yeah, I think it is, and I think we're all in danger of creating a situation. There are some people in situations who will be able to run at this level and spend this much as long as it lasts, but many of us are not like that, And so I think music education, I think there is that part is precarious right now, and trying to rein it in is going to be, it might be a Pandora's box kind of thing.
All right, Greg. So this question is my favorite of the interview, and it's if I had invented a time machine and I could go take you back to your high school graduation, what advice would you give yourself?
Well, that's a hard one. Believe in yourself and work hard. And in truth, that is the belief in yourself. I don't know that I had that, and I started to have that much more when I student taught. I told you that story. When I started teaching, I started working really, really hard. And so I would tell myself that. I would give myself the same advice about making sure you study your scores. I wouldn't have to wait 6 years until I talked to William Ravelli to tell me that, I guess. And to think, I would tell myself some of the stuff that I know, like keep the students at the center. There are, choose the hill you want to die on. Like everything doesn't have to be a fight. You got to choose when you need to take the stand and make sure you take it at the right time. And, and consider all angles before you, I've often been a bull in a china shop, so.
All right, Greg, and this is not a morbid question. This is the piece that means the most to you. If you had a chance to choose it, what would be the last piece you'd want to conduct?
Persichetti Symphony. I have always had an affinity for it. I love the piece. There are others that I hope to get to play again before my career ends. Like I would love to do Hammersmith again. I love the Hindemith Symphony. I love Lincolnshire Posy. I would like another shot at emblems. The Aaron Copland emblems is it's a hard piece to understand. It's not overly joyous and, when you finish it, but it's a great piece and it can have a profound impact. But the single one, if, to choose one, is Persichetti. Yeah. And I, for whatever reason, early on at Marian, especially, I found a sound in that I just felt was right. I don't know. And then I think we've done it probably 4 times or more, maybe 5. And it's been different each time. One time, when we first did it, I was still trying to figure the whole thing out. There was one time about number 4 that I totally blew. Oh my God, it was terrible. I was studying it because I don't do it the same way each time. Like I try to relearn it. And I was out in Colorado and talking to somebody who had played the symphony under Persichetti. And he told me that Persichetti took the tempos considerably faster than they're marked. And it was, and I absorbed that. And so I went back and immediately started cranking tempos because I wanted to be as much the symphony of Persichetti as I can. And so, and it was a total overreaction to the comment. And it was, I was embarrassed when I was done. I was like, oh God, Greg, I hope you get a chance to do this again, because you don't want the last time you do Persichetti to sound like that. It wasn't that kids couldn't play it that fast. It was just that it shouldn't be that fast. It didn't sing at all. And then the next time we played it, the last time was, I'm pretty proud of that one. But I'd like to give it one more run.
All right, Greg, this is an odd question in the middle of a COVID year. Is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
No, we have a concert coming up Wednesday. It's not, nobody's going to be there. We're playing Come Sunday, which I'm thrilled to do.
Yeah, that's a great piece of music.
And my band is very, very diverse, and I can just tell that the students have figured it out. Like they know why that piece exists, and so they're doing a good job with it. It's a, without having much rehearsal time, it's a real challenge, but they're doing very well. And we're also playing Peace Dancer.
Jody Blackshaw.
And I like the piece a lot. Again, I wish I had more time to get in and really kind of tweak some of the small spots, but it's very nice, and so we're, that's going to be a good thing. And so that's good. And, I get to go out to Oklahoma and do a clinic this summer. So that'll be fun.
All right, Greg, how can people get in touch with you?
Probably the easiest way is gbimm at marianchs.com, or call the school, and I'm always ready to talk.
Yeah. If anyone's listening to this interview, they know you're there.
I love talking about bands for sure.
All right, Greg, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's been fun. I've really enjoyed this.